Hello and welcome to Advanced Compositing for Brands, Photography, and Type. My name is Aaron Nace from PHLEARN.com, and in today's course, we're going to be going over 4 different examples that can be used in so many different situations. We're going to be showing you how to cut your subject out of their background and create like a beautiful banner behind your subject, including type and an interesting gradient and blurred effect that blurs the background. We're even going to be expanding the background in our images. We're also going to be creating a few different types of mockups. We're going to show you how to take a sign and place it into a photograph into perspective. And we're going to show you how to take a banner or a graphic and place it onto a product for mockup purposes as well. Now, in our final example, we're going to be taking a different product photo and placing it onto a new background and even placing labels. So all of these different mockups and composites, all of these are going to help serve different purposes depending on which market you're interested in, and all the techniques can be used in a variety of different ways. We got a great lab session for you. All of the assets are available for you to follow along as well. Let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. So here in Photoshop, the first thing we want to do is take our stock images. We're going to go to our first example and bring both of our stock images right here into Photoshop. Just click and drag them both in. Now we have this really interesting graphics. I want to put this basically into this image, but we're going to wait on that for just a second. For now, we're going to click on our main image and hit F for full screen. The first thing I want to do, and this happens all the time, our banner looks really good. It's very wide, but what happens if we want to make this a little bit taller? Now, obviously, I don't want to go stretching the people in this photograph. It's not going to look good. So we're going to use content-aware crop to add more information to this image. So to start off, let's go ahead and hit our crop tool. C for the crop tool, or you can just simply click right over here on your crop. Now up here at the very top, you have a few different options. Up here it says delete crop pixels. I recommend keeping that unchecked. It's going to be checked on by default, so be sure to uncheck that. That's just going to allow you to get your work back at any time if you need to. Now the other option here is called content aware. This means if you crop larger than your area of your photo, it's going to fill that in automatically. So let's go ahead and click here on our image and just drag this up a little bit. There we go, and hit that checkbox. So it's going to increase the amount of size up there, but as you can see, the computer is thinking right now because it's actually analyzing the rest of the image and filling it in with whatever it thinks is going to be best. And as we can see, it actually did a pretty good job. This wood grain over here looks good. The window over here looks good. This area here is not perfect, but we can fill that in. Let's, for instance, grab our clone stamp tool. I'm going to sample our current and below layer, and then I'm just going to hold Alt or Option and just kind of fill this in with what I think should be there. There we go. So just a little bit of cleanup here, and you can see you can extend your image, which is incredibly, incredibly helpful. Because a lot of times as designers, we're asked to like make an ad banner or something like that for a website or things like that, and the assets that you have just aren't large enough. So this content-aware fill can be a huge, huge help. There we go. Let's go ahead and just fill that in there just a little bit, and fantastic. So of course you can do this sort of thing manually, but the content aware option really helps you out. Now, I chose the top because it's relatively simple. We have a wall and things like that. Now, if we hit C for content aware crop and we try to add information to the bottom, let's go ahead and see what that looks like. All right, content aware fill. And we can see, yeah, in some places okay, but our subject just kind of like repeats over and over and over again. So the tool does have its limitations. I recommend using it on relatively simple areas with simple backgrounds. It works fantastic in those cases. So next time you're out on a photo shoot or working with a client, you can say, hey, let's photograph the subject against a white wall, knowing that you can add space vertically or horizontally at any time. All right, let's go ahead and hit undo. Now, for now, my main goal, I'm just going to merge these together, Control-Command-E. My main goal is going to be creating a little banner, but I want it to be behind my subject. Okay, so if you want something between your subject and the background, first thing we need to do is cut our subject out. So let's go ahead and duplicate our subject. I'm going to click and drag this to the new layer icon, and we're going to go to Select and then down to Select Subject right here. Now, this is a new addition to Photoshop. It works extremely well, and you can see it did a great job selecting our subject. Now, we have a couple areas that aren't exactly what we want. We don't want to select the subject and background. So I'm going to grab our Lasso Tool, simple Lasso Tool. I'm going to hold Alt or Option with the Lasso Tool, which brings up like my minus icon, and then I can just circle right around the areas I don't want included. So Alt or Option, minus those out. And we can see in this case, it didn't include this area. The reason is because it looks very similar to my background, so it wasn't sure which is my subject. Not a big deal. Still with the lasso tool, I'm going to hold down the Shift key, which is going to allow me to add to my selection, and I'm just going to simply paint right over here. There we go. Alt or Option to minus out if I do anything wrong. Now, I'm not worried about making this perfect because we're going to update our selection in just a little bit, but I do want to make sure that it actually includes my subject. Hold the space bar down, we're going to simply move right over here, and then we're going to add to the selection here. So hold Shift, again, still with my lasso tool, and just add to my selection right there. Fantastic. And let's go ahead and just minus this area out. Perfect. Now this is looking really good. However, I always recommend using Select and Mask when making selections in Photoshop. It just cleans things up substantially. So we have our selection. Let's go up here. You can either click on your Select and Mask option, which will be visible if you still have your lasso tool selected, or you can simply go to Select and then down here to Select and Mask. There we go. Now we have a few different views here. I recommend just looking at it on white for now. You can do on layers, but you'll see the background layer. So let's make sure it's set to on white. Okay, you can adjust your opacity here if you want to. And right here where it says global refinements, this is where we're gonna add some feathering. So you can just see it kind of softens the edge up. Now with a little bit of feathering, let's go ahead and bring this up, and contrast, it kind of like makes the edge quite a bit cleaner. So let's go ahead, we'll just show you the original. So let's go to show original versus this one. Let's go in here and take a look at this. So show original, and then right down here, let's go to show original. So you can see the original kind of has a little bit of a jagged edge to the selection, which doesn't look natural. And then there's the after. So we would just want to add some feathering and some contrast, and that will help in general make the subject just cut out a little bit better. Now, if you need to, you can also shift your edge in a little bit here. Okay, and as you can see, that's going to include or disclude our background. So we can just shift that edge right in there, and that's looking pretty good. So relatively quickly, we're able to cut our subject out of the background using Select Subject, and then here in Select and Mask as well. So let's go ahead, we're going to go to our output settings, and then we're just going to say output this to a layer mask. It's just going to automatically place this as a layer mask on my layer. So let's go ahead and hit OK. Fantastic. So now here we have our background, and then we have our subject cut out. So I just moved my subject around, and check that out. We have duplicates of our subject. So if I create a layer in between those, and let's just say I grab the brush tool, I can now paint anything that I want on my image, and it's going to look like it's between my subject and the background. Okay, so this would be a great opportunity to add text, graphics, banners, all those sorts of things. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I want to create a little banner ad right behind our subject. We're going to say that this is like a splash page for a website or something like that. So let's go ahead. We're going to grab our rectangle tool. So let's go to our rectangle tool. Okay, and I'm going to simply click and drag to make a nice rectangle behind our subject. Now, keep in mind you can change this rectangle at any time, so you're not stuck with exactly whatever shape that you create. We do have the option to round the edges right here. As long as this chain link is on, it's going to round all the edges at the same time. So let's go ahead and just click here and drag out to round the edges. Okay, now we have a few options for filling this rectangle. Right now it's set to fill nothing. I'm just going to change this to white, and then the stroke, I'm going to change this to white as well. We can change these properties at any time by going to our properties window. Again, to get to that, just go to window and then down to properties. Okay, so this is looking pretty good as of now. I'm going to hit Control or Command H to hide my selection. And here we can see what it looks like behind our subject. Fantastic. Now we can see in this area, it doesn't look perfect. The reason is my cutout is just a little bit too small. So I'm going to go to my selection again. We're going to go to Select and then down to Select and Mask. Okay, and then we're going to put this on layers. Check this out. Here are my global refinements. I can now shift the edge. We're just going to bring a little bit of feathering, a little bit of contrast in there as well. And I can shift my edge back out again there if I need to. And you can see it cleans that up. All right, let's make sure our output is set to layer mask and hit OK. Fantastic. So this is looking pretty good. Now, obviously, we're at this point, it's just a white banner behind our subject. It looks good, but I want to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. I want to do a background effect. So I want in this area to kind of look like a blurred window to be able to see the background of our photo. So what we're going to do is temporarily make this invisible. I'm actually just going to duplicate my background layer. So Control-Command-J is going to duplicate my background. Now, I want to add a blur to this, but I want to be able to change that blur at any time. So to do that, we're going to use a smart object. Let's go ahead and right click here, and we're going to go to Convert to a Smart Object. There we go. So now that this is a smart object, I can apply a blur to it. We're just going to do filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur. There we go. And that looks pretty good. So we have a nice blurred background, but I only want this to show up where this rectangle is. So let's go ahead and take this and click right above the rectangle. And then we're going to use what's called a clipping mask. Now, a clipping mask will actually allow us to make one layer only visible where another layer is already visible. It's really easy to do. Just right click on your layer and go down to where you see Create Clipping Mask. There we go. Now this background is only visible inside of this rectangle. How cool is that? And if I move the rectangle around, look at this. It moves where everything is visible as well. So it's a really, really cool effect. Now, let's just go ahead and place it right there. You can also double click on your Gaussian blur here and then change the blur at any time. So you can have like a super blurred effect, less of a blurred effect. All this can be changed. Now, the only one thing that I am not in love with right now is that you can see a little bit of blur from around my subject. You can actually double click right here on your image, which will bring in basically the smart object. And then here, what I'm going to do is just sample this white color here, and I'm going to paint right over top of my subject. And that's basically just going to make sure they are not included in the blurred area in the background. So this doesn't have to be super labor intensive. You can do this relatively quick. Basically, I just want their edge to go away, keeping in mind that the final result is going to be quite blurry anyway. So I'm just using my brush tool here and then sampling and painting right over top of the edge of my subject. There we go. And this is just going to help the edge of my subject not really show up. I'll show you the before and after in just a second, but you can see this doesn't take a long time. Okay, now let's go ahead and zoom that out. I'm going to hit Control-Command-S on that, and it's going to update automatically here in real time. Did you see that? All right, let's go ahead. I can just show you the before and after. Because the blur, as it was before, included some of my subject. So back here on my subject layer, let's just turn this layer off to include my subject. Control-Command-S to save that, and you can see it includes a little bit of my subject in the blur. Turn that back on, Control-Command-S to save it, and now our subject is not included in the blur. It looks a lot better. Basically, it's just blurring the background, not my subject. And you can get to that at any time just by double-clicking on the smart object itself. Okay, and check this out. I can still move this around. It works really well. I can still change the amount of Gaussian blur on there. Okay, fantastic. So we're off to a really good start. Now, the next thing I want to do is add just like a little bit of a white area in front of this to make it look like frosted glass. So we're going to create a solid color fill layer. We're going to go all the way up here to white. Okay, and then we're going to create a clipping mask, just like we did before. Let's right click here. We're going to go down to Create Clipping Mask. There we go. And I'm just going to simply lower this opacity until it gets me that frosted glass look that I like. That's looking really, really nice. We're going to do one more layer on top of that. Let's go ahead and right click on this, and we're going to go to Create a Clipping Mask again. And I'm going to hit G for my gradient tool. We're going to click on our linear gradient. Okay, I want to make sure that my foreground to transparent gradient is checked. There we go, this one right here. And then we're just going to set our foreground color all the way to white and hit OK. Now I can just click like this and add a little bit of a gradient from top to bottom, left to right. I can kind of do whatever I want. It's just going to give it like a little bit of a lighting effect. There we go. Fantastic. So everything is looking good. Let's go ahead and group all that together. We'll just double click and call this banner. There we go. And you can see our subject is just simply right on top of that banner. But I want to put that graphic in there before. So let's go ahead and introduce this graphic. Now, first thing I'm going to do is just choose which graphic I want to use and then just copy only that because I don't need all this stuff in there, right? So I'm going to choose this area here. Let's go to our little marquee tool here, rectangular marquee. There we go. Little quick tip, if you hold down the space bar, you can actually move your rectangle marquee while you're making it. Super cool. So let's go ahead and bring just this area in. I don't need anything else. Now I'm going to click on the move tool, and we're going to go and click and drag from one image to another. All right, let's hit F for full screen. So bringing this back in, I'm just going to scale it up a little bit. There we go. Something like that is looking pretty good. I want to go ahead and put this inside of the banner, and let's just make the subject on top of it invisible for now. Cool. Now, in this case, I actually want to select this white area and make it invisible, right? Because it just doesn't look that great. So let's click on our layer with the graphic. We're going to go to select, and we're going to go down to select color range. Now, in this case, I'm just going to click here right on the white area. It's going to turn that into a selection. I'm going to hit OK. So now that the white area is a selection, I'm going to click here right on my layer mask. Okay, it's going to just make that white area into a layer mask. Now, it did the opposite of what I want here. If that ever happens with your layer mask, no big deal. Just click on your layer mask and hit Control or Command I to invert it. All right, and then I don't need these, so we're just going to go ahead and fill those with black on our layer mask as well. Fantastic, and let's go ahead and put our subject right on top of that again. And now we can just kind of scale this and put it around where we want it. And we have a really interesting way of making our graphic. Let's just go ahead and make sure that all the edges are in fact not visible as well. Fantastic. And I think this looks really good, but I want to make the background just a little bit brighter. So remember, we created a solid color fill layer here, okay? On white, I'm just going to increase the opacity of that a little bit. It's going to make our background a little bit brighter, and we can see this looks really good. So you can put your graphic in there and move it around. Now I can just take this entire thing. Look at this. I can take this entire thing and move it around. You can see the background doesn't move with it. So if you want to move it, I still recommend taking your rectangle and then moving this around, because the background blur is going to move with it because it has that layer automatically in it. And then if you want to move this to a different place and then just move around your banner with inside of that, you can do that too. There we go. Let's go ahead and move it up just a little bit. And there we go. So this really is such a nice workflow because it allows so many different options, and you can kind of adjust things on the fly, and everything is completely non-destructive and creative. Let's go ahead and hit F for full screen. There we go. Really, really interesting. All right, now all we have to do is save this out and we are good to go. So let's go ahead and just give this a save here. All right, fantastic. So now that we're good to go, let's move on to our second example. So in our second example, we're going to be taking a logo and compositing it into a sign graphic. Then we're going to show you how to update that automatically. All right, let's go ahead and close this example out. Now we're going to just pop here into our second example. There we go, sample images, and we have two different stock photos from Adobe as well. We're going to click and drag these in to Photoshop. Now, here we have the image that we want to do our composite into, okay? I want one of these logos here to actually look like it's on the sign, and I want to make sure that it's in perspective as well. That's super important. So the first thing we're going to do, let's just make this a little smaller, is take a look at this sign and say, yeah, that's pretty much a square, right? It's in perspective, but the sign graphic is pretty much a square. So we're going to create a new document that's a square. So let's hit Control or Command N for new. We're going to do a width of 2000 and a height of 2000, so a square. Let's hit OK. There we go. And then I'm just going to move this from one to another. Okay, so my stock image, we're just moving around. And now let's go ahead and just make this a little bit bigger. Control or Command T, we're just going to, there we go, make this a little bit larger. Put this right there about in the center. And then I'm going to just create a layer mask on here. Okay, let's just, there we go. Shift Command I, and then fill that with black. Okay, so basically we have our sign. Now, this is going to be like your working document, and you can change what's on here at any time. So let's go ahead and save this. Shift Command S. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and save this out, sign mockup PSD, and I'm just going to call this sign 2 because I've already done this before. And there we go. So now it's time to go ahead and place sign2.psd into this document. All you have to do is go to File and then down to Placed Linked. Now, we have two options here. We have Place Embedded, which is just basically going to create a copy of your PSD file inside of here. That's nice because it packages everything together, but you lose a little bit of flexibility with that, and it's going to increase file size. place linked will actually just place a reference of a PSD into this image. It doesn't increase file size nearly as much, and it includes a lot more flexibility, which we'll show you now. So I usually wind up using place linked. So let's go ahead and get to place linked. There we go. I'm going to hit sign2.psd, and we're going to go ahead and place that in. Now let's hit F for full screen. The next thing I want to do is basically make sure that this is in perspective, or it doesn't look right. So I'm going to lower the opacity of this layer. Now, to place an object in perspective, the first thing you want to do is try to get the object to be about the same shape as the final object, right? Like in this case, I have a square, and the final is pretty much a square too. Okay, so back here on our document, we're going to hit Control or Command T for our transform. Next, I'm going to hold Control or Command and click one of these corners. There we go, and simply drag it till it fits the corners of my document. And you can see by just clicking these and dragging them right into place, it automatically makes it the perspective of this sign. So let's go ahead and hit that checkbox right up there and bring our opacity back up to 100. Now, this looks okay, except it doesn't look real, right? Because the sign is, we can see the white background and everything like that. So we're going to change our blending mode from normal. We're going to go to multiply, and that basically just gets rid of the white background. There we go. Now, obviously, we can still see the original sign there as well. So we're going to make that invisible. I'm going to create a new layer above my background, and I'm going to hit L for my lasso tool. Now, with my lasso tool selected, basically I just want to rough draw right around the objects I want to remove. So I'm just holding Shift with my lasso tool to include all these areas. There we go, looks pretty good. And now we're going to go to Edit and then down to Content Aware Fill. This is really similar to what we just did in our last example to increase the size of an image. In this case, it's just going to fill this in with hopefully white. So let's go to Content Aware Fill, brings up our Content Aware Fill dialog. And here we have a preview of what the final is going to look like. You can see you did a great job. It's relatively simple here. It just needs to take some more white from the rest of the sign and fill it in. So we're going to output this to the current layer because I've made a new layer. Hit OK, and you're good to go. So this layer basically removes the original sign graphic, and then now we've added a sign above that. Now, we don't have any information here for the little leaves and things like that. So let's click on our background layer. We're going to go to Select Color Range, and then we're just going to select the color range of these leaves. I'm going to just click on this fuzziness just a little bit. There we go. Hit OK. Now I'm going to duplicate our background layer by hitting Control or Command J. That just duplicates whatever was in the selection. All right, and let's go ahead and bring it up to the top. And now we can see by bringing our sign in there, it includes that area as well. And if we need to, we can just include a little bit more. There we go. Sign detail or leaf detail or things like this if we need to. There we go. Cool. All right, and then I can just use a layer mask to kind of fit this in here. It's these like little details that are going to wind up making a big difference in your overall composite in terms of how believable it actually is. Okay, and let's make that visible there. Pretty cool. Now, the kind of the best thing about this image is the fact that all of this information can be changed at any time. Because remember, we're using a linked smart object. So let's go back here. Here we go. Go back to our original image, right? And I can simply move this image around. So I have my layer mask here. I unlinked the two of them. Okay. Now I'm going to click on my layer, and we're just going to simply move this. Okay. So I'm going to just basically include like a slightly different graphic. Let's go ahead and hit Control or Command T, scale that down a little bit. There we go, and put it right about where we want it. Cool. Now, check this out. This is the coolest thing ever. All right, I just want to make sure you can see everything. So I haven't saved this sign.psd just yet, but watch this. When I hit Control or Command S to save, it automatically updates here on this image. Okay, we can bring in another one, Control or Command T. There we go. Let's go ahead and bring that a little bit smaller. Control or Command S to save that out and automatically update there. The coolest thing is that this is happening in real time. It's also updating in perspective as well. So you can work in a flat two-dimensional space even during your design and iteration phases, and then all you have to do is save that out, and it's going to automatically update in perspective into your composite image. So this is a really cool way to kind of like test ideas and designs and concepts out, how they're going to look in the real world, and then make edits to the original two-dimensional document and automatically update it. Because you don't want to start editing a design in 3D once it's already been placed into perspective. That's just going to get really, really messy and kind of limit your options further down the road. So this workflow is a fantastic method for just kind of like fixing all that stuff and allowing a lot more creativity in general. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and save this out. Shift Command S, we're just going to save this out. There we go. All right, and go ahead and close these. Now we're moving on to our next example here. So for our next example, we're going to bring in 2 more stock images. Just go ahead and click and drag those right in. All right, so I have my coffee here that I want to actually place onto this coffee bag. Now we're only going to be using the coffee bag on the right, so let's just go ahead and use our crop tool. C for the crop tool. We're just going to bring this in. Of course, you can apply this same technique to any of these coffee bags, but for the sake of time, we're just going to be doing one. There we go. Let's just paint out that shadow as well and change this to white. Select custom color. Let's go all the way to white. There we are. So now we basically want to do kind of the same thing. I just want to create a new document that is basically around this shape, like of the front of the coffee thing. So I could guess at this if I want, but I can also just use some information from here to decide how I want to do it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, M for the marquee tool, and I'm going to just create something like this. I want to include the side of the wrapper too. There we go. Something like that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to hit Shift Delete, and I'm just going to fill this with white. There we go. And then we're going to right click, and I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to click here on a new document. So I have a new document here. I'm going to hold Control or Command and click on the contents of this document and go to Image and down to Crop. So this new document is going to be about the same size as this little white crop here. I'll just delete those because we don't need them anymore. Okay. So remember earlier how we just made a rectangle for the sign in our last example? This is basically trying to make the same-ish shape. All right, so we're just going to save this out, and I'm just going to go here, and there we go, to our PSD, and we're just going to call this bag 02. All right, then we're going to take this Adobe stock, and I'm going to just click and drag this right on top of there, and go ahead and close this out. So you guys probably know the deal now. I just need to take this bag 02 and place it in here. Let's go ahead here. We're going to go to File and then down to Place Linked. And we're just going to go to bag02.psd. Here you can see it, and hit Place. There we go. Hit Enter there. I'm going to go ahead and change this from normal down to multiply. And then we can start adjusting this bag because it, of course, doesn't look great just yet. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to take this coffee. There we go, and we're just going to duplicate this to a new layer. So Control Command J is going to duplicate that to a new layer. Okay, and then our bag itself. Let's hit Control Command T. I'm just going to scale this way, way down, and I want to create an interesting type of effect here. There we go. So let's go ahead and push this right over here, and then I'm just going to change my background to light gray so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. There we go. So let's hit Control Command S to see how this looks, and save that there. All right. So it's kind of like a back and forth here, and you'll see in just a second how cool all this lines up. All right, let's go ahead and put that right about there. So I'm just kind of putting, I want that to be, yep, right about there. And then this layer, Control or Command T, let's just go ahead and scale that up a little bit. All right, and we're going to bring this right over here because I want some of this to kind of go over the side of the bag design. All right, that's actually looking really, really good. So now what we're going to do is basically load this in to our Liquify tool. And I'm going to be able to translate, basically push this around the side of the bag. It's really, really cool. So here in our mockup, what we're going to do, this is already a smart object. So if I use the Liquify tool, I'll be able to change this at any time. So let's go to Filter, and we're going to go down here to Liquify. There we go. Now with our Liquify filter, I can simply just push and pull this around if I want to, okay? I can have this show backdrop option turned on as well, okay? I'm gonna just turn my bag on so I can see what I'm doing here. And now I'm gonna actually paint a freeze mask. So this is basically allows me to keep, like, wherever I paint this freeze mask, these areas are simply going to stay where they are. Okay, so the freeze mask basically is used for like corners and edges and that sort of thing. I'm just going to delete the freeze mask just right over here to make sure it actually follows the edge pretty well. Doesn't have to be perfect. All right, there we go. So with this freeze mask in place, now I can grab my forward warp tool and I can start to warp this around. And I'm just going to kind of like bring this down and warp it around in this way. And this is going to allow basically the design to make it look like it's actually like warping around and showing up where, there we go, where the edge actually is. All right, incredibly cool. So here with the freeze mask on, I can go ahead and show mask. I can turn this off and on. We can see that it actually looks like it's actually going around the edge of the bag because I put that freeze mask on and then pushed it into place. Now, let's go ahead. I'm going to grab my forward warp tool on the right-hand side. We're just going to push this in. So there we go. So I can get a little bit more information here on the right-hand side to make it look like it's kind of curving around the edge of the bag. And of course, you can always use layer masks here as well. So don't feel like you have to get this perfect. I can just simply mask this out at any time if I want to. But by kind of like grabbing this information and compressing it on the right-hand side, it's going to make it look like it's curving around the edge of the bag. There we go. All right, so looking pretty good. And I don't have to do a ton of work. So here, let's go ahead and click on this reconstruct option, and we can see there's our before and the after. So we're kind of basically conforming the design to this coffee thing. Let's hit OK there. All right, and we're going to hit OK here as well. Now keep in mind, this is on a linked smart object, right? So it looks really good here, but at any time, if I decide to like move this around, let's just move that around and hit Control or Command S to save it. There we go. It's going to automatically update here on this design as well. Like move this around, Control or Command S to save it, and you can see it moves around here as well. There we go. Let's go ahead and save it back where it was to start with. Perfect, and that's looking really good. So let's click on F for full screen. Now all we need to do is create a layer mask on here. I'm going to just hit B for my brush tool, and we're going to paint with our layer mask. So I'm painting black on our layer mask just where we don't want this to be visible, right? Obviously, like off of the bag, we don't want the design to be visible. There we go, looking really good. All right, just a couple little brush strokes, super easy to do. Fantastic. How cool is this? All right, so our bag looks like it's pretty much around the corner. Now, check this out. If I want to like take this coffee logo and bring it down here, I can do that. Control or Command S, it's going to update and automatically put it here as well. So the next thing I want to do is take a little bit of the highlights from the bag itself and put that over top of my design. I'm going to make this invisible. We're going to go to our layer, our background layer. Okay, we're going to go to select, and I'm going to go to color range, and then I'm just going to click on the white color in the background. White is the color of highlights. So our fuzziness can now change to include more or less of those highlights. So that actually looks pretty good. All right, so we're selecting the highlights from the bag. Let's hit OK. And now on a new layer right above that, okay, I can actually fill this with white. So I'm going to go to Edit, down to Fill, and we're going to fill this with white. There we go. Control or Command D to deselect. So what this does, it basically puts this right on top of your design. So it makes it look like the design is actually integrated into the packaging and the lighting. Now I can also clip this, Option Command G, okay, or you can right click and go to Create a Clipping Mask. Now this is going to make it only visible where the actual design is visible as well. So basically now I have the lighting from my product, from the actual photography. You can see here like on the very top how it kind of makes that integrate there as well. The lighting is now integrated on top of the product as well. Now, if you want to add a tiny bit of a blur, you can see it's really well defined here. So I'm just going to click on this layer. Again, it's a linked smart object. So with a little bit of a blur, I can still update the object itself, but the blur is going to make that just a little bit more believable. And there we go. So let's hit F for full screen. I'm going to right click and just go to our custom background color. Really, really cool. So basically, we started off by creating a shape that's relatively similar to the shape of the coffee bag. I just did this on this layer. We duplicated it to a new document, basically, and then placed the design into that document. Then we put that as a linked smart object and used the Liquify and the freeze mask to actually make it look like it's wrapping around the edge of the design. And then at any time, because we're using a smart object, you can change your design and it's going to automatically update here in the template as well. And then to finish it off, we added some highlights and just made it look like it's actually integrated into the bag design. Really, really cool. So let's go ahead and save this out. There we go. I think we're doing fantastic. Hope you guys are enjoying, having fun. There we go. And we'll just go ahead and close this out. All right. We got one more great example for you, and this is going to be a really cool composite image. So I've actually got 3 different images I want to composite together. We're going to go ahead and click and drag all 3 right into Photoshop. And again, all this is available as far as your download included with this course. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, this this like brand here, these like products, I want to put them into this background. So I don't need all of this image. So I'm going to just grab my marquee tool, M for the marquee tool, and we're just going to grab like what we actually might want. Like just that little bit is totally cool. We don't need the rest of it. So now we're going to use our move tool and just click and drag from one image to another. All right, there we go. And I'm going to hit F for full screen. We're just going to work on these 2 for a bit. Now, basically, I just need to lower my opacity and figure out about where I need this to go. So let's lower the opacity. I'm going to hit Control or Command T and flip this. The reason I want to flip this is because we have light in our background is coming kind of from the right-hand side of the photo, okay? You can see that usually by analyzing the shape and direction of your shadows. You can see like this shadow for this little rock is kind of moving in that direction, okay? We can see the shadow on this side and the shadow on that side, right? So that tells me that our light source is coming from the right-hand side, probably the sun or something like that, okay? So basically, we want to make sure the light source is coming from the right-hand side here as well, but as you can see, the shadows are facing the opposite direction. Let's hit Control or Command T. We're going to right-click and go to Flip Horizontal, and that's going to make the shadows go in the same direction as the shadows from the background image. Okay. Now, I just need to get rid of this blue. We don't need it. So what we're going to do is go to our layer. We're going to go to Select and then down to Color Range. And we're going to click on the blue. There we go. Now, I'm just going to include just a little bit. It's okay if some of the blue is included, but I don't want this much. All right, that looks pretty good. And then what we're going to do is just click on our layer mask icon. Okay, it did the opposite of what we want. No big deal. Control or Command I, it's going to put it in the right place. All right. Now I'm going to go in here and just kind of clean up the edge of my layer mask a little bit, just painting with a brush tool. Just make sure all my edges are nice and soft and everything looks really good and smooth. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is put this into the image. I know there's still a lot of blue. Don't worry, we're going to take care of that in a little bit. I just need to put it right at about place. I need to shrink it down and make sure it's actually going to fit. Let's hit Control or Command T. We're just going to scale this down a little bit and put this right into place, right? I just want to like make sure it looks like it fits onto, there we go, onto this little thing right there. And maybe we'll make this a little bit bigger. All right, cool. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's hit enter there. So now what we have to do is work on making this actually fit, right? Because it's got all this blue, that doesn't look right. The colors don't really work as well as they should. There are a few different ways that we can target this blue. Now in this case, basically we just have this blue color and then we have this white color. We don't have a ton of color variation. So we can work on colorizing this image manually, which is really cool. So to start off with, what we're going to do is create a solid color fill layer. And I'm just going to go ahead and give it any color. It doesn't really matter right now. Okay, now this solid color fill layer, we want to make sure to clip this to our layer with the products on it. So we're going to right click and go to create a clipping mask. There we go. And we're going to change this from normal down to color. Fantastic. So Now that it's set to color, it's time to go ahead and choose the right color. So double click here on the layer, and then you can use your eyedropper to just eyedrop and sample around your image, right? So we can choose that shadow color, we can choose this color. We just kind of want to click around until it's something that we're happy with. The other point that I want to make is we're going to color the highlights and shadows separately. So right now I'm just looking at the shadow color. There we go. Let's hit OK. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now we want to go ahead and color the highlights. Ideally, you'd have color throughout the entire color range, and there's a lot of different ways you can do this, but if you want to color something in general in Photoshop, I always recommend having at least 2 points, shadows and the highlights. So let's go ahead and duplicate this layer, okay? Right click here, we're going to go to create a clipping mask again. Now we're going to double click this. I'm going to click on my highlight color, okay? And then I want this to only be visible in the highlights. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to double click on this layer, and this brings up our layer style. And right here at the bottom, we have an option for blending. So it says blend if, and I can choose the underlying layer. And what I'm going to do is take this slider here on the underlying layer and drag this from the left to the right. And that's going to make sure to not include this layer where the underlying layer is dark. All right. Hold Alt or Option and click here, and that separates the slider out into 2 sliders. So Alt or Option click, and then we're going to click and drag this out, okay? And this is just going to not be visible where the underlying layer is darker. And then I can kind of take this and bring this over here as well. Okay, so you're going to see this is a way for me to basically color just the highlights of my layer. Let's just turn this off and on so we can see what this looks like. There we go, zooming in, off, and then back on. All right, if I want to, I can even change this a little bit brighter. There we go. Off and then back on. So you can see now we have shadow color, okay, which takes care of this blue fringing that we have there as well, okay? And we have highlight color. So without the highlight color, can you see how it looks really, really flat? All right, so highlight color and shadow color. Before, shadow color, highlight color. And starting to look much, much better. All right. There we go. And I can take this shadow color and I can make it a little bit less saturated there as well. You can change that at any point in time. So you can see the composite is already starting to look pretty good. It's not there yet, but it's starting to look pretty good. So we can do a few more things. I'm going to create a new layer. All right. And we're just going to click on our background real quick. I'm going to grab my Lasso Tool. All right. And I'm going to grab some of the shadows here that already exist in this image. So just selecting those shadows, I'm going to hit Control-Command-J and then bring this all the way up to the top. All right, now if I move this down here, you can see, pretty cool. But what I want to do is clip this so it's only visible right here on my layer with the cosmetics. So we're going to right click and I'm going to go down to create a clipping mask right there, only visible on the cosmetics. Okay, then we're going to change this to either darken or multiply. I need to give it a blur because it has all this texture on it, right? I don't necessarily want that texture. Okay, so let's go ahead and right click. We're going to convert this to a smart object. There we go. We're going to go to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur. All right, because I just need to get rid of all that little texture. We don't need it. It's not doing us any favors. Pretty cool. And then it's set to a multiply layer, and basically I just want to make my lights a little bit lighter. So I'm going to hit Control-Command-L, and this is going to allow me to affect the levels on this image. So you can see I can bring my midpoint up or down, and this is basically just going to allow this shadow. Let's make our lights just a little bit lighter. Sometimes it looks a little bit crunchy if you go too far. There we go. So now, check this out. I basically have the same shadows. I'm going to hit Control-Command-T. We'll just scale this up a little bit. I have basically like the same shadows of my background image now affecting my product as well. And I don't have to affect this in the highlights as much as the shadows. So I can double click there. I'm going to hold Alt or Option to have this not visible in the highlights. There we go. And now it's just more visible in the shadows than it is in the highlights. Check that out. Pretty cool. Let's lower the opacity. And it's starting to integrate into this image a little bit better. So here's this image. You can see I can get right back to the original photo. Okay, this is my layer mask. You can see it's not a perfect layer mask by any means, but I'm recoloring my shadows, then my highlights, and then adding a little bit of this shadow to it. Now let's go ahead and we're going to just clean up our layer mask a little bit. There we go. Something like that looks pretty good. And then I just want to create a new layer mask right above that, or sorry, a new shadow rather. There we go. And the shadow is just going to I'm going to grab the shadow color here from the wall itself. There we go. Kind of grab the core of the shadow. And I'm just painting this with the brush tool, basically. We're going to change this from normal down to darken. There we go. So just simply painting in right with the brush tool. And I can hold shift if I want to just paint up and down. All right. Now there's a lot of different tools and techniques and practice and styles when it comes to painting shadows in Photoshop. For right now, we're just doing a really, really nice and simple one. Just straight up and down. All right, and I don't need it to be too visible. So we're just gonna lower the opacity of that just a bit. There we go. That's looking pretty good. All right, so let's go ahead and paint that off from down there. And I'm really happy with this. Now, the next thing I want to do is actually take one of these labels and apply it to my products. So let's go ahead and zoom in here. We're just going to take this label, M for the marquee tool. Again, this is Adobe stock as well. All right, we're going to take this label, and we really only have time to do one, but you basically do the same thing over and over again. So we're going to click and drag this in right here and hit F for full screen. So let's go ahead and put this label right here on this background. Now, we're going to lower the opacity. First, let's go ahead and turn it into a smart object. We're using a bunch of smart objects. Let's lower the opacity a little bit, okay? And then we're just going to scale this down a little bit. There we go. Scale it down, and then just like we did with the sign earlier, we're going to hold Control or Command and grab these corners and make sure that it actually goes to the edge of our product. Let's hit that checkbox up there. All right, bring it down. Next, we want to give this a little bit of warp because you can see the bottom has some curvature. So let's hit Control or Command T. We're going to click here on our warp, and I'm going to go to Arc Lower. There we go. Let's just change the bend amount. We don't need to go that far. We just need a little bit of bend. There we go. Hit that, and let's hit Control T. I'm going to give the top just a little bit as well. So let's go to Arc Upper, and then we're just going to bring this bend down just a little bit. You want to make sure it has a little bit of curvature or it's not going to look right. All right, now we just want to give this a tiny bit of a blur because it's a little too crispy. So let's go to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur. There we go, like 0.01 or 0.02 is totally good. So now I need to make this look kind of like it's wrapping in 3D. We're going to add a highlight and a shadow. So let's go ahead and double click on this layer. Okay, I'm going to go to Bevel and Emboss. So we're going to add our bevel and emboss. Let's go ahead and bring up our depth here. And this simply creates, let's go ahead and look at this, turning this off and on. It creates a highlight on the top and a shadow on the bottom. And then my colors here, we can actually just use the colors from the image itself. So click here, grab my colors from the image itself and hit OK. All right, we're going to soften that just a little bit. That looks pretty good. Turn our size down to about 2 pixels. It's just a small label, so it doesn't have to be a big thing. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and put a drop shadow on this as well. And then our color, we're going to choose here from our image. There we go, and you can see a big drop shadow. And there we go. Let's just make that nice and small because it's just a label, right? So super small, and then lower down the opacity. Okay, that's looking pretty good, but it doesn't look like it is affected by the light of the image, right? The lighting we should have highlights and shadows above this label. So here's how we do it. Basically, I'm just going to make this layer invisible. We're going to create a new layer on top of it. I'm going to go to Image, and then we're going to go to Apply Image. And this takes a snapshot of everything that you see and puts it on a new layer. So here we go. Let's hit OK. And then we have this Apply Image on top of it. What we're going to do is simply make this apply image a little bit less visible. There we go. And we're going to right click and I'm going to go to Create Clipping Mask. So this layer is only going to be visible on top of the little label. Now we're going to change this from normal. We're going to go to multiply, and let's go ahead and bring our opacity up there. Okay, so with multiply, look at this. It's taking the actual shadows from my image and it's multiplying them over top of my photograph. Let's hit Control Command J, group that, or clip that again, and now I'm going to change this to screen, and I'm going to hit Control Command L for our levels, and we're just going to make our darks a little bit darker. All right, let's just desaturate this too. Let's bring our saturation down quite a bit. So I have one layer set to multiply and then one layer set to screen, and this is basically allowing some of the, there we go, let's double click. I'm going to say this layer don't be visible where you're darker, just where it's light. This is basically taking the highlights and putting them back over top of the label. All right, now our bevel emboss is just a little bit too visible, so we can just go in here and adjust the depth of our bevel and emboss. That looks pretty good. We can change all these settings at any time. This is a completely non-destructive way of working in Photoshop. And if I want to, I'm give the bottom a little bit more curvature here. Let's see, arc lower. There we go, hit that little checkbox. So all of this is completely non-destructive. I can change this at any point in time. The bevel and emboss here is just a little bit too visible. There we go. Let's just bring that down just a little bit. And there we can see placing a label over top of this is really not that difficult to do. So just to kind of recap what we just did, I'm going to place this label over top. We added a bevel and emboss and a drop shadow and a Gaussian blur, and then did a warp to make it look like it's in perspective. That doesn't make it look real at all. It helps. But then when we take a snapshot of the background and apply the shadows of the background over top of it, and then apply the highlights over top of that, what we get is a really interesting mix to where the label actually looks like it fits in this image. And then again, I would just go in here and things like your drop shadow, I would just go in and adjust that, and then the bevel and emboss, adjust these levels here, and get something that looks fairly realistic, something that you're happy with. These effects generally are better when they're more subtle. Okay, it's easy to overdo these effects. Try to be a little bit more subtle with those, like bevel and emboss and things like that, and you're going to look good overall. All right, let's go back through this. We have just a couple of minutes left. I just want to show you what we've done so far. So we have our background image looking great. Okay, we brought in our product photo, and in this case, it's just on a blue background. We didn't even do an incredible job cutting it out. We didn't need to. A lot of this blue is still there, but then we recolored the blue shadows. We added some highlight color. Okay. Then on top of that, we took some of the shadow colors and some of the dynamics from the image itself, applied a blur and placed it back over top of the image. Okay, did a little bit of the shadow. I don't even think that shadow looks that great. So let's just lower the opacity on that shadow. There we go. That's looking better. And then we applied the label over top of that shadow. So this is a really, really cool workflow because we could have used Link Smart Objects for this image as well, and then changed out the label at any time. So all of these different examples are going to help in real world situations where you have product mockups or you need to composite something into perspective or cutting subjects out and creating type and logos and graphic works. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this lab. Wonderful to see you, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.